Welcome to the Detroit Public Library. My name is AJ Funches. I'm the Assistant Director for Marketing and Communications, and I am so thankful that you guys took the time to come out tonight to be a part of this wonderful event that you're about to see. We get a lot of authors that come to the Detroit Public Library, as you would assume, but it's always a little sweeter when they're homegrown. So please, I'm going to bring up Ian Wallace, and he'll do the introductions, and we'll get it going.
Thank you. Good evening. That was kind of weak. Let me get cool for y'all so y'all can. What up, though? So we got a special treat for y'all. We got the son of the city and the daughter of the city. We got a Wolverine and we got a Spartan. And they both put on for the city in front of a camera when they're not in front of a camera. Jalen Rose, my prospector brother, we both went to Southwestern. Michigan, U of M, he changed the game. NBA vet, TV, NBA countdown, Jalen versus Jacoby. And also, he's also giving back to the community with his own school. So let's give it up for that. And next, let me talk about my boo, my wife, a Mumford grad. Oh, y'all in the house? Okay, Mumford. MSU graduate. ESPN, 12 years. Y'all ain't got to clap for everything. We're going to be here forever when y'all keep doing that. Jemele Hill is Unbothered, her podcast. She's producing Colin Kaepernick's 30 for 30 on ESPN, and why y'all here today, she's the author of her memoir, Uphill. So without further ado, Jalen Rose and Jemele Hill.
Good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
So I guess this is the point of the proceedings where I take over, huh?
Yeah, that's right. You're the host.
So first off, I want to thank all of you guys for being here. Please give it up for the lovely Jemele here. And you make me feel guilty because I actually wrote a book. I'm fortunate enough to be a best-selling author. And I didn't do a book tour, and I definitely didn't come here. I'm so disappointed in myself.
How could you, Jalen?
I'm so disappointed in myself.
Well, you know what that means? You have to write another book.
Yeah, I gotta write
You
another
gotta
book.
write another book.
So as Ian was doing the introduction, and before I get into your book, the future bestseller, it reminded me of so many things that we have in common, but also so many things that we may see different. So, first off, we both worked at ESPN. 12 years. Tell me about those years.
You know, ESPN, I think a lot of people are probably under the impression that because our parting was awkward, that is the term I would use, that I have ill will or bad feelings about being there, but it was the best job that I ever had. I mean, as you know, Jalen, what you're able to do there, how you're able to turn yourself into a multimedia journalist. You know, I started as a writer, went into podcasting, did radio, had a TV show, went to Sports Center, and did all these things there. So the journalist I was when I got there versus the one I was when I left are markedly different. I was the best journalist I've ever been when I left there. So even though the last year was interesting to say the least, I still consider it the best job that I ever have. And there's still a lot of people there that I love that are doing great things and very proud of your work and a lot of the people that you work with. So, you know, I have nothing but mostly positive memories of ESPN.
So let's talk about your versatility. I don't want people to gloss over what you just said. You started off as a writer. You ended up being a host, an analyst, a pundit. having your own show, having your own voice, podcast, TV, radio. Just talk about those levels of your growth in media.
Well, it's something I like to tell younger journalists is like the platform and the medium is probably going to change and always be evolving and be different. But the core of what you do, telling stories, reporting, gathering information, source building, those things will never change. It's just the methods. And so all of the things that I learned as a young journalist, as an emerging journalist, were all very much in play. And so all I did was flip the medium. You know, I was giving my opinion in a column, so then I learned how to give my opinion on the radio. Then I learned how to give my opinion podcasting, learned how to do that on television. And then another sort of small but monumental growth change I made was learning how to host. And you know this, hosting is a lot different than what people think. You know, there's certain intricacies of television that you have to learn about timing, taking people to commercial, facilitating a conversation. And so I had to make that adjustment from going to somebody who just sat there and talked to understanding the director cues, the producer cues, and how to really kind of be a floor general. So it's like, you know, you go from being Kobe to trying to be Chris Paul, you know? And so that was another skill set that I was able to develop there. And once I left ESPN and, you know, had the show on Vice and was doing things with CNN, it made me that much more marketable. And, you know, it allowed me to flow very easy from medium to medium.
So now writers can be on television and do podcasts. Another thing that we have in common is that you were very early in the podcast space. That podcast became a daily television show, and it became the 6 o'clock Sports Center. Please give it up for his and hers. Because, I mean, I ain't gonna lie, we were doing our little old show, and then y'all took over Sports Center, and y'all was doing skits and doing Boys in the Hood. Like, we need a budget.
See, the reason we had to do that, though, Jalen, is because we didn't have a budget, right? They weren't giving us, before we got to Sports Center, we had never been on a commercial, right? And so, and you know, just so you all know the backstory, so Jalen was doing a show called Numbers Never Lie. And it was him, Hugh Douglas, and Michael Smith. Jalen was doing two jobs at once, because you were doing NBA Countdown and doing Numbers Never Lie. And what I think is one of the greatest finesse moves ever is that you managed to do this without ever moving to Bristol.
Boom,
that was a tremendous finesse move. So he leaves Numbers Never Lie, which leaves a vacancy that Jalen told me about, and even was kind enough to let me know that they were really considering me for that role. And so I wound up replacing Jalen. And so, as you know, that they didn't have a great budget for Numbers Never Lie. And so we started doing these skits and these other things because that was really the best commercial for the show. And, you know, because we weren't being sent to the Super Bowl. We weren't, that came much later in his and hers after we, you know, begging and pleading and just like, please give us some money. But, you know, I like to think that, you know, the skits were really impactful. One, we didn't realize that that's not what you're supposed to be doing at ESPN, but they let us do them anyway. And even now, I will go down in history as probably the only person in ESPN history who ever drank a 40 on TV. Whoever drank a 40 on television. I was like, it was a real 40, y'all. Right. You know, because if you're gonna get in character, you gotta be fully in character.
So I know we're at the Detroit Public Library, and we're gonna talk about your future best-selling book, but I wanna get back to the beginning of your origin story. And you were very vulnerable in this book. And I appreciate that, and I'm pretty sure Detroiters and your family and friends can appreciate you talking about the relationship with certain people in your life. In particular, the relationship and the dynamics of your parents and what they were overcoming and the challenges that they navigated during your childhood, and also the influence of your grandmother. So can you talk about how you covered that in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that I'm looking at the book as something that I'm only going to write one memoir, right? So if you know you only have one opportunity for a game-winning shot. I'm using these basketball analogies because you're here, I guess.
Appreciate that.
You're going to try to get the best shot possible. And I think when people read memoirs, especially by people who have some kind of public status or a celebrity or a public figure, oftentimes you read these and you feel like they're not being honest with you, or they're not fully telling you the whole story, or they're holding something back, or maybe even trying to make themselves look better than they actually are. And I didn't want to do any of those things. I said, all right, if I do this, and it's going to be one time only, I'm leaving every play on the field. Okay? And I also thought that people could benefit from some of the things that I shared in the book, just in the sense of, I think it's a very powerful testimony, talking about addiction and sexual abuse and trauma, generational trauma. These are all themes that a lot of people can relate to. And when you talk about them openly and honestly, you're able to remove shame from them. And what I wanted to do is remove the shame and allow people to have open conversations with the people in their lives, and even with the people that they know who have struggled through some of these issues. I think when you learn about their stories fully, you're able to give them a lot more grace, especially when it comes to your parents. You're able to see them as full human beings, and not just as your mom and not just as your dad, but people who have had a life full of triumphs and disappointments and obstacles. And so it's the understanding and the empathy and the grace for me of why I think it was important that I share as deeply and honestly as I did.
Is your mom here?
She right there.
Hi.
You didn't hear that that's my baby?
Thank you. And I'm a mama's boy. Unfortunately, I lost my mother last February. And when I saw you and your mother do a couple of national interviews, I don't know how many times that's happened. What made now the time that you A, wanted to tell the story, but B, wanted to let us in on it?
Yeah, well, it was an interesting process because it started as being more financially driven, to be totally honest. It's like I didn't really have a plan to write a memoir. I wanted to always be an author, but I wanted to write fiction. And so I didn't ever think about writing about myself. Not that I didn't think I was interesting or anything like that, but I just didn't really want to write about myself. If anything, I would take stories or situations that I had been through and, make them into something very fictionalized. But when my literary agent made it pretty clear that there was a lot of interest in the publishing world, I said, all right, well, I guess this memoir has chosen me. And the journey, it's been a 3-year journey, because the book deal, that happened in 2019, and it kept getting pushed back because of the pandemic. And because they wanted me to be able to do stuff like this, come to Detroit, come to different cities, engage with people, talk to people, create conversations. And so it was one of those things that once it was done, while it wasn't always easy to write about certain things and because you have to relive them at the same time.
Correct.
And these are things that I think I'd either firmly packed away, reconciled with, dealt with years ago, and now you're bringing all that back to the surface. It's like the wound is healed and you just decide, let me just go pick this until it bleeds a little bit. But I'm thankful that I'm a writer by trade, and I think most writers will tell you, it's the old adage is that if you want something to be good, you open a vein and let it bleed on the pages. And I knew the only way that people could really feel the emotion and the impact of the things that I had gone through would be to be honest and transparent and let the emotion out on the pages.
Please give it up for that. That's incredible. So, something else we have in common. We both love the Pistons.
Yes, this is true.
Anybody here love the Pistons? Bad boys. But before I get to the good, I want to talk about the not so good.
I have a feeling where this might be going. I just have a feeling.
Right. So how did you avoid being a Lions fan?
Okay, see, I thought this was going to be about your alma mater, but I know you're going to get to this. I know you're going to get there.
Because there's so many diehard Lions fans in this room that's like myself.
Yep.
That give it up. And when we go 1-6, we still act like we're 6-1.
Yep, too.
And then when we win 2 games, we act like we're going to the playoffs, and we're not.
Yep.
But it's going to be an exciting season.
That's for sure.
So how did you avoid this abusive relationship?
You know, I mean, I guess all kids are impressed by winning. And so all the other teams, while under construction, there was like hope there, but there was really nothing with the Lions. And, you know, it's true. Like they really didn't. I mean, I was thinking about all the teams that won when I was growing up. The Tigers won in '84. They drafted Isaiah Thomas. The Pistons drafted Isaiah Thomas in 81, 82. Then, of course, the Bad Boys era comes in, and even after the Tigers won the World Championship, they were still very competitive. We know what happened again with the Pistons, and then the Red Wings, they drafted a guy named Steve Yzerman, so they had like that linchpin star. The Lions, it was just nothing. It's like, and you know, you can blame my mother. Like I started watching the 49ers, and I did. Because she loved Joe Montana, and I started watching them, and they just became my team. And so I never looked in the Lions' direction. But I will say this, I don't root against the Lions at all, because I care about the mental well-being of all my friends. And I want good things for them. And I have a huge Lions fan in my house, and my husband, and I want him to experience the goodness that I've been able to experience. But I'm impressed with the hope, because this season, had you talked to a Lions fan before it started, after Hard Knocks, y'all were convinced y'all were going to the Super Bowl. And I'm just like, you know, yes, you have a very interesting coach. You have, you know, a very fiery coaching staff. You got a couple players, but there was nothing about the makeup that convinced me. But I said, you know what? I'm just gonna have to let him find out for himself. And unfortunately, not a lot of glimpses of hope. But one day, the one thing you could say is you were in on the ground floor. You were in on the ground floor. So when it finally happens, it is going to be a celebration like no other. I've told other people this who are outside of Detroit. Like, I know we've witnessed all these other franchises here win a championship. The Lions, if they ever just make it to a Super Bowl, I think it's the biggest story in Michigan sports history. And nothing else would come close. One day, Jalen, one day.
So being a Michigander from Detroit, hearing you speak reminded me of something. People from the East Coast, whether you guys realize this or not, they don't really have a collegiate football team and or basketball team that they root for. A lot of people from the East Coast, they adopt teams. But when you're from here, we fall in love with sports whatever season it is. So did you play sports growing up?
I did. I was the neighborhood tomboy, so there's a lot of different sports I like to play, but I gravitated toward baseball. Baseball was my favorite sport. And I played fast pitch softball. Some of my teammates from Mumford are here, in fact. You know,
that's awesome.
So I have to, you know, tell people, like, I was pretty good. Like, I wasn't just out there getting cardio. I actually was pretty good. And so I played, Pee Wee softball and PAL League softball. Everybody know about the PAL League, played that. I used to play at Tyndall Recreation Center right there on Wyoming and 7 Mile, I think it was. And I just love competition. I love the fact that, you know, sports, especially for a young girl, is so important because it teaches you about positive body image. It gives you self-confidence. A lot of major CEOs, a lot of leaders that we have in the corporate world are women who were former athletes. And so I was able to gain, much like you did, those valuable skills playing sports. But, you know, of course, as a girl, you know when the end of your career is coming. Like, there was no professional softball league. You know, while I might have had some small college interest, I knew that wasn't going to be an avenue. I had an academic scholarship, so, you know, I was content to leave it in high school. But nevertheless, learning those things about the game, the intricacies, and just team dynamics were very helpful once I became a sports journalist.
Shout out to the softball squad. In the building. Give it up for them. So I basically grew up on Puritan and Apple and no doubt, what up, though? And it's in the same district as Mumford. Mm-hmm. And in the same district as Cooley.
And yet, you wound up
going to Southwestern.
Yep.
Yes, because what happened in that dynamic was my mother felt you get to hang out with your friends all of the time, you're not going to school with them too.
Ooh.
Because at first I was going to go to Cooley. Like, they were good. I wanted to play for Ben Kelso and play with Mike Talley and them. Like, that's what I thought was going to happen. Mm. And like after 10th, 11th grade, when Antoine Jobert and Southwestern came to the west side, he was pulling up at Ford from half court, and they was playing at the state fairgrounds, and Anderson Hunt was dunking and running into the tunnel, and she saw Perry Watson. She's like, you going to play for him. Mm. And so I want to ask you, like, what did Mumford mean for you and your development?
So it's a very timely question because last night was the Mumford book event where I got to talk to a lot of my old classmates, old teachers, and including my old softball coach, Coach Bowie. And, you know, when I went to Mumford, because I think I took the test to get into Cass and Renaissance because you had to test in then. Yeah. Yes,
they test you out too.
Exactly.
To this day.
Exactly.
To this day.
Exactly. I was like, I think I tracked.
Going to school don't test you in, test you out. Go to JRLA.
That's right. That's right. So I tested. And I was always not a great math student, right? And I had a bad 8th grade year. 9th grade, I was on top of it. And most of my friends, because I went to Beaubien, and most of my friends were going to Mumford. They were the neighborhood school. They were right up the road on Wyoming. And when I got to Mumford, there were some very key things that happened there. One, when I got there in 10th grade, I took a class, took a creative writing class, and that was just because a friend, the son of one of my mother's friends, took that class, and he was like, oh, he was an upperclassman. He was like, you should take this class. And so I did, and I had a teacher named Terry Blackhawk, who is mentioned in the book, Miss Blackhawk, and she was the one who sort of helped me open up that writing gene. I've been, of course, writing short stories. I've been writing in a diary. But in this class, we wrote about poetry, and I was exposed to different authors, and it really just opened my world up. And so that was key. And then in 11th grade, I joined the high school newspaper staff, wrote for the Mumford Times, had to take high school journalism. And, on top of the things that would help me later develop as a journalist, it also was the benefit of being at a black high school, a super black high school. I joked that we used to be
super black.
I joked that we were East Side High before Lean on Me. Like, we were like, and so, but having regularly seeing black teachers, not even knowing that being taught black history was supposed to be different. Mm-hmm. Like, it was a regular part of the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And, I took an African American Studies course. Mr. Fancher, who I just recently saw in DC, and he was one of the best teachers that I had there. And I think it gave me just such a strong sense of identity. I'm already growing up in a black city. I have a black neighborhood, strong black voices in my own family. It was the perfect set of steps before I got to Michigan State and went through cultural shock of not being in the same black enclave, but I went there with the sense of identity of being proud of my blackness, proud of my heritage, and that would prepare me for some of the things that I would face down the road. So Mumford was a very important and critical step. And not to mention, I'm remiss for forgetting this momentarily, but Mumford also, there was a program there called the Compact Program. Mm-hmm. And that was what allowed me to get an academic scholarship. It was something they were offering, I think, to all Detroit high school students, where you had to maintain a 3.0, you had to have 90% attendance, and you had to score at least, I believe, a 19 on the ACT. And you would be given, they would pay for your tuition and fees at any college in Michigan. And if you went out of state, they put a certain percentage of money toward that. So that scholarship changed my life. And so that was that, between that and the early journalism training, those were the things that I needed to just create more options and a better life for myself.
So you're in Lansing, you're at Michigan State. I don't know why you didn't go to Michigan.
So I got into Michigan.
Clearly you could have gotten to Michigan.
I got into
I'm
Michigan.
listening to you right now. What happened?
So
what happened?
this is what had happened. And at this time, like we're talking the early 90s. So y'all doing y'all thing, right?
Desmond just won the Heisman.
Yeah, and I'll be totally honest.
G. Rice.
All of that, y'all won in what, 89? Won
Yes.
the national title in 89. The Fab Five is the most highly celebrated recruiting class in history. They got the Black Sox and all the long shorts. I know you hate the fact that it's just been a setback now.
I know.
You know, y'all started it, and I was like, it's going in a different direction. So all of this was happening, and I think, you know, I've tried to explain to people that Detroit is so close to Ann Arbor. So especially during that time, the whole city was Michigan fans, and I was one of them. And then Michigan made this decision that they were ending their journalism program, and they were making everybody just gravitate to being English majors, or you just had to pick another major. Now at that time, I'm working at the Detroit Free Press. And so many people there went to Michigan State, and all they did was talk about the journalism program and the state news, the college newspaper, and they got to me. They got to me with you all ending your program, and even though I got in, I was like, I want to go and check out Michigan State. And so I took a tour up there. A Michigan State recruiter came to Mumford, not a Michigan one,
Right.
and they closed the deal. And so I didn't go there for sports fandom. I went there really to be a journalist. Otherwise, you know, y'all could have had me if you hadn't closed the journalism program.
We should have stepped
You know,
up.
I would have been
I'm
in it.
disappointed in us. I really am.
I'm disappointed you didn't go to Mumford. You know how many championships we could have won with you?
I know that's right. I used to have to hear that all of the time.
Yeah.
But in Lansing, something else happened. The gentleman that introduced us.
Well,
You met
yes.
your husband in college.
No, I did not.
You didn't meet him in college?
I did not, because he is 5 years younger than me. So I met him at Michigan State. I just met him at homecoming.
My God. You know what I mean?
Yes, I met him
God.
at Michigan State on the premises it was 2014. We were both at the Black Alumni Tailgate. Shout out to MSU Black Alumni. And yeah, so I met him at go green.
Yeah.
So I met him at a tailgate, and you know, the rest, as they say, is history. You know, it was something completely unexpected. He had a friend that used to be a former student, actually, of mine. I know that sounds weird to say, but when I worked at the Free Press, I co-taught a sports journalism class, and his friend was in that class, and I was just catching up with him, and then over walks this very smooth, very handsome man, and you know, we're flirting, and I was like, oh, like he kind of fine, like, and later on, I saw him at the Black Alumni Party, and then that's when we exchanged information. He called me the next day, because some guys, they don't do that. Either they wait it out or wait till you call them and all that. He did not. He jumped on opportunity right away.
I like that. So, give it up for that. Give it up.
You know.
So I want to ask a follow-up question, because no relationships are perfect, and we're all in here navigating different relationships with our mates, with our siblings, with our parents, with our friends. But the thing I love about you guys' relationship is it seems authentic. It seems like you guys can actually be yourselves. So can you give us some advice on what it's like to be in a healthy relationship?
What it's like to be. Dang, okay.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
All right. Well, I do think one of the things I love about our relationship, it was set, this tone was set early, is that Ian was the person I most I was most looking forward to talking to at the end of each day. Like, I do think there has to be a genuine friendship there, a genuine wanting to be around each other. Like, he's the most fun person that I'm around, you know, and he's the one I most want to spend time with, and I never get tired of him at all. So I do think that's part of the fact that we have like a very genuine friendship. He makes me laugh. He's got a great sense of humor, and that was always something that is important to me. And on top of being somebody I know I can depend on and rely on, he has excellent integrity, like really excellent integrity. Like, I never have to worry. He has a very clear sense of right and wrong. And I love that about him, as well as a lot of other things. But I think it's important that you be able to talk to the person, be honest with the person that you're with. So I don't know if I have any secrets necessarily, because I think everybody's relationship is what you make it, and it's also everything. Things that work for me may not work for everybody else, or things that I respond to or don't respond to that may not be the same for somebody else. But you know, he knows. I mean, he probably knows me the best. You know, so it's definitely, again, it was something I never saw coming, which I think is a good thing.
And one other thing you didn't mention. Have you ever seen him with his shirt off?
At this point, who hasn't seen him with his shirt off? It's a running joke.
I'm like, I gotta get in the gym. I'm like, man.
Yes, he is a very nice physique.
Yes.
Between the two of us, he's definitely the healthy eater. He's far more disciplined in terms of working out. But I like that, not just because of the way he looks, but I like it because it makes me have to raise my game up or whatever. So yes.
Me too. Me too. Because I follow him on IG. I'm like, all right, I gotta go to the gym. You know
he has a couple abs in there.
Absolutely. So who's already ordered the book? Raise your hand if you already have the book.
Yeah, look at this room.
Give it up for yourself.
Yes, thank you all.
So I want to do a couple of things. I want to ask more questions, but I want them to possibly ask you questions.
I think
as
that's
right?
what I'm told is supposed to happen.
Okay.
Is that
Would you guys like to ask the great Jemele Hill any
oh,
questions?
all right. I don't
And
know.
since-
Where's the?
Are you picking who asks, or can I pick?
You are the host, Jalen.
Okay,
I
great.
am just
Yes.
here.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, nice to be here. Excited to read this. Can you talk about how you have bridged sports, journalism, and politics? Because I watch you everywhere you are. I'm a fan of yours. I read The Atlantic. I look forward to your articles. And you have such a necessary and unique perspective on us and how all of these things are kind of intersecting. Can you talk about
Yeah,
that?
sure. She asked me to talk about just writing about the relationship between sports, politics, gender, race. That's what I write about for The Atlantic. And I know for a while, it feels like we may be coming out of this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jalen, but for a while, you often heard people say that sports and politics don't mix. One, everything isn't politics. Like, to me, politics is policy. It's a pro and a con. When we're talking about racism or a gender pay gap or other issues, that's not politics to me. Those are humanitarian rights, right? That's just simply right and wrong. But we've seen this so often in sports, where sports is able to create conversations, create dynamics before the rest of the society even catches up. You know, you think about Jackie Robinson, he integrated Major League Baseball in 1947. That's almost 20 years before the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act was passed, and before we really saw integration happen in this country. It was a conversation generated in part through sports. And even when you had John Carlos and Tommy Smith raise their fist at the '68 Olympics, they did it to bring awareness to the fact that here they were performing for America, and yet at home they were considered second-class citizens. And the great thing about sports, why I think it's important that we continue to write about the dynamic, even if it's messy, and continue to commentate about that dynamic, is sports allows for something that doesn't happen with a lot of topics in this country. Sports is the one thing that we do together. Like, we still live in a very segregated society. But all of us in here, we're from different places, different neighborhoods, different socioeconomic backgrounds, but we might all be Pistons fans. And so if there's somebody on the Pistons that says something that makes us think or creates a conversation or even a controversy, we will all be able to discuss that under the dynamic of being Pistons fans. And while you might tune out a politician that says something, if LeBron James says it, you might listen. You know, it's just kind of the way it works. So sports and all these intersections have always been the case. And to me, it's a very fascinating dynamic. I love the work that I do at The Atlantic because it is a political magazine. So I don't have to worry about, unlike when I was at ESPN, 500 people shouting at me to stick to sports. And I'm like, what do you want me to do? Colin Kaepernick is taking a knee. You want me to act like he's not? Right? Like, this is what is happening. If LeBron James and other athletes are talking about they don't want to go to the White House because they don't feel comfortable, should I just ignore that they're saying this? So I'm very happy to be writing about this, especially during a time where I think athletes are really feeling the most comfortable that I've seen them speaking out about certain issues in my career. Like, I know it happened before them, but there was a period, I think, as part of the Jordan era, where a lot of athletes really didn't want to talk about certain topics because they worried about their marketing, their appeal, their contract, how people would react. And because of what's happened to Colin, because somebody like LeBron James has been so vocal, because we've seen what Naomi Osaka has done and Serena Williams, they have been able to lead a different generation of athletes that feels very comfortable talking about racism, mental health, issues that we really deal with, because sports is not happening in a different universe. It's happening here on this planet. So we can't act like it is untouched by the things that affect our lives every day. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you. My brother in the back.
Hi, Jemele. Can you tell us when you that moment when you were going out for a game like golf, and you had that passion for writing? When did that become clearly your passion? When did that happen?
Yeah. So his question was, when did my passion for writing start? Well, it started in a place like this, the library, because reading was always very big in my life, as I write about in my book. My first stepfather, he read to me on a regular basis. Books and just reading and learning were a big part of my home environment. And so the wonderful thing about books is that it stokes your curiosity about the world. And I think the number one trait a journalist should have is curiosity. And because I was reading so many great books from, Judy Blume to Beverly Cleary to Choose Your Own Adventures in those books, because of that, I wanted to understand how they were able to write the way that they did. So I started writing my own short stories and started, writing poetry. And then, of course, as I became more familiar with Black writers, with, Maya Angelou and Zora Neale Hurston, I really wanted to study the craft. The journalism part, came a little bit later in high school when I wanted to know why the world worked the way that it did. That's why I mentioned that curiosity aspect. And then you could tell stories in a different way, because you could tell stories about real people. You can put into context historical or present events. And I wanted to be part of that. And then there's an accountability factor in journalism too that I thought was a really important dynamic. We used to hear all the time in journalism school about journalists being the watchdogs of society, and really the whole point of journalism is to challenge the structure, the hierarchy, the powers, to make sure that they are actually taking care of the people and doing right by the people. And so I kind of wanted in on that sense of justice. And so even though sports is not typically how you think about that in that heavy way, but writing about athletes who achieve incredible things is another way to tell the story of people, but especially the story of Black people. So those were like kind of all the dynamics that went into there. So it was a process. I don't know if it was one moment, it was a collection of moments that led to it.
More questions, Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Question for you. Where would you say, well, one of the things I'll say is that what I admire about you is that you can hold your own in all conversations, all in the room full of men, and you're so knowledgeable. And I'm always curious, where did that confidence So you're talking sports, male dominated, and I feel like when I used to watch hers or listen to the podcast, it always seemed like the guest kind of like gravitated towards you. I love my, having my career over the summer, but it always felt like they gravitated towards you.
So, like Jalen mentioned, where he grew up, Puritan Apple-Line, right? So I grew up 7 Mile, Asbury Park, Curtis and Mendota, Joy Road and Lauder. When you grow up in those kind of areas, and especially if you're one of the few girls on the block that is playing sports and going to school or whatever, you have to, you know that one, little boys don't want to lose to you in any sports, and they're going to try to train you. And so growing up in an environment where I was very comfortable and used to having to, on the sports field, like hold my own against other dudes. And that includes, like, if they roast you, you roast them back. Like, that's just what it is, right? And so, and just the environment, I think, in Detroit, because, people in this city, like, we tough. Detroit is built different, right? And so you have to have a certain amount of toughness if you come from this city. And we all carry a chip on our shoulder because we know that there's this perception about what our city is, and a negative perception mostly. And so all of that, as I was sort of rising in the TV world, was a part of my existence. And it's easy to know what you're talking about when you're prepared. So I mean, by the time I got to ESPN, I'd covered a couple of Olympics. I had covered college football and basketball for 6 years. I'd written a column in Orlando. I had done all these things, and all of that collective experience made me very confident that I knew what I was talking about. We're going to cheat and go to a reporter, Jalen. My man, Larry Lage.
What up, my brother? What up, LL?
Jemele, what are some of your favorite interviews of all time, and who are some people that you've tried to get and haven't gotten, who do you want?
So, favorite interviews. God, I've had a lot. Usually, I will say this, the difference, I think, when I was writing, especially early in my career, to me, all the interesting people were never the big athletes. Like, they were never like the Michael Jordans they kind of weren't. And so I remember in 1998 when I won the state award in North Carolina for Best Sports Feature. And that was about an athlete nobody probably will ever really hear of. And her name was Mandy Garcia, and she was the first female athlete at the Citadel. And that's one of my favorite stories that I've ever written. And, with the podcast, it's different because I'm constantly talking, to newsmakers. So I always think about the people that either leave me with something I didn't know or tell me something about themselves that I never, would have guessed. Like, I have an interview coming out on the podcast next week with Lawrence Fishburne. And he said some really interesting and very emotional things about what it took for him to play Ike Turner. And so that's one of those conversations where I'm like, I'm gonna remember, this conversation. And, going forward in terms of people I wanna get, who doesn't wanna sit down with Michelle Obama, right? Yeah. I would love to sit down with Serena Williams, of course. Serena and I have been on a panel together, but we've never been in a sit down interview, type of situation. Meg Thee Stallion. I would love to interview Meg Thee Stallion. It's funny because there's a lot of people I've been able to get that it took a long time to get. Like, it took me probably almost 3 years to get Issa Rae. That was a long time coming. And so I just one reason I love doing the podcast is that and I know, Jalen, you could relate with your own podcast because you've had some very terrific guests on yours as well. It's just the ability to have intimate conversations in that space because it's 45 minutes to an hour. And when you're on TV and when you're writing for print, you don't get that kind of time with people. So I love the fact that I'm able to get people of this stature to give me that kind of time.
Yes, ma'am.
What's up, OG?
I wanted to know, when you were younger, did you ever meet me in person? At my house here in Detroit?
Well, you used to come over, mostly I saw you at DJ's house. Okay, 90% of the time, yeah.
The reason why I'm asking is because it's a wonderful thing for me, being 80-something, to know someone who's in the life, the writer or something, and you're live, because a lot of people that we've known are not here, and to know that you're friends with my granddaughter, so I feel really special towards you.
Oh, thank you, OG. let me tell y'all something. OG, this is probably my favorite memories of you, is that whenever I would go and hang out at DJ's house, every time you came over, you would be dropping knowledge on us, and not just, about life or anything like that, but just about books to read, history, like all of those things. So I always appreciated that you took the time to school us, even though I'm sure we looked like we didn't want to be schooled at that moment, but I appreciate that you always took the time to deliver a word on us at every turn. Mm-hmm.
Questions, yes.
We have an online question from Cassandra Freeman, who says she has an 11-year-old daughter who's already decided she wants to be a writer. Do you have any recommendations for how we can further and support her daughter's interests?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely think writing is a difficult profession to get into, depending on the type of writing. But I would say pretty much any writing is difficult. And if you're in that situation, you can't, I know there's a certain amount of reality that parents always want their kids to face, and saying like, okay, have your fallback plan. I'm sure your mother was telling you constantly about a fallback plan, but you want to encourage them to pursue it and be passion-led. I tell young people this all the time. So many of them pick things to pursue based off how much money they make, and that's like such a big mistake. And I get it, and especially for a lot of us in our community, we don't, many of us are still like first generation going to college and don't have the ability to allow kids to explore their particular passion from a financial standpoint. But as I tell the young people, like, if you pursue it and you're serious about it, you'll make money at it. Mm-hmm. When I came out of college, they said the average starting salary for a journalist was $19,000 a year. I never made $19,000. I made 22, but I never made 19, right? But the whole point is that even though I didn't get in this, certainly not to be, nobody thought getting into journalists you were going to be rich, and certainly not famous. It was very much a working class profession. The whole point of this is that I love this just as much now as I did when I was just making $30 a story working at the Lansing State Journal. So even, as a parent, you want them to make money. Y'all want them to get out the house, and I understand that. But even if it's non-traditional, just encourage them along the way, because there'll be setbacks. There'll be other people in their lives that will be talking them out of it and saying like, no, you should do engineering because you make more money. And I would when I was on campus at Michigan State, I would see the engineering majors looking so miserable, a lot of them. Because I know what they saw. They saw that you coming out of the gate making $45,000 a year, and that's what they saw. And they were like, oh, I'm gonna go for that. And they hated it. They wanted to change their major, and then they were too deep in it. So make sure that you encourage her to really pursue her passion, and encourage her to read, because reading is a central part of writing. And most of the great writers, when they list their favorite authors and books, they're some of the most well-read people in this world. So reading is like job number one, even though I know it's tough when you're a kid because you hate reading because of school, but reading is job number one.
And I will be remiss if I didn't ask a follow-up question. Tell us 5 books that you would advise for us to read.
Ooh.
Other than Uphill, which we all have, right? Give it up for Uphill. Give it up for Uphill.
5 books. So I'm gonna stick to the books I've read recently. I mean, I could definitely, I'll take one being my favorite book of all time, which is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I think it's one of the most perfect books ever written. I think it is the most perfect book ever written, to be honest. And certainly you can do Langston Hughes and James Baldwin, and I would encourage that as well. But the last 5 books that I've read, And I went through a big memoir kick because obviously I was writing a memoir. But one of them is a book called Night Crawling by a wonderful young author named, I believe it's Layla Mosley. I think that's her name. She's out of Oakland, and I will hate it if I get her name wrong, but it's called Night Crawling is the name of the book, and it won the National Book Award, and it's sensational. And I cannot believe that she wrote this at 18 years old. It's incredible. And I hope somebody makes a movie about it. Viola Davis's memoir, and I just saw that she was nominated for a Grammy because the audiobook is out of this world. I'm also reading Will Smith's memoir right now too, or listening to it rather, because the listen is just, he's rapping in it like he goes in. He definitely goes in. One that I love, but I didn't go into it expecting to love it. Demi Moore's memoir is fantastic. So I'm sort of all over the spectrum with it. I'm trying to think of something maybe fiction-wise that I read. Oh, it was a book by Attica Locke. And if any of you are Netflix subscribers and you've watched the movie or the series From Scratch, the Attica Locke, I heard it brings everybody to tears. I have not watched it yet, but Attica Locke is the showrunner for it, and she's written a series of, they're not quite mystery novels, but a series of fiction novels that are quite good. So those are just some of the books I've read. Like I like to keep a good book.
Terrific list. Yes, Mama.
It's Layla Motley.
Layla Motley, thank you, Ma. Layla, thank you. Yes,
you,
Layla
Mama.
Motley. They might have that book right here in this library somewhere.
So I don't know how much time we have remaining, but I definitely want to get any more questions.
Oh, we got one back
Boom,
there.
striped shirt. There we go.
Just wanted to know, Jemele, of the chapters that you wrote, and out of everything that you poured into this, which section brought you the most joy to wrap up?
Ooh, that's such a great question. Which section brought me the most joy to write about? It was, well, when you're a writer, when you get in the last chapter, you're very excited about this. You're like, oh my God, I'm almost I did my own audiobook,
That's
just
like
so y'all
30,
know.
40 hours.
Oh, the audiobook took a couple weeks.
Yeah, but go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
Oh yeah, so the end was good from that standpoint. But I think writing about the period of time from high school to probably when I got my column job in Orlando, like that was great for me to write about, just because I was thinking about some of the things I had been able to accomplish and do, and it put me in a reflection mode, which I am often not in because I'm, out here grinding and doing my thing and just trying to, put one foot in front of the other. But the thing about this book that I loved in terms of the process is that it forced me to sit in some things and to sit and just be like, oh, I have to sit and think about this now. And I enjoyed that, because a lot of times, especially women, especially Black women, we get things done and then we're on to the next thing, and we don't even appreciate or realize how monumental it was, the last thing that we did. So this book forced me to stay present. And so I enjoyed that part of the process. That brought me a lot of joy. We're gonna let you cheat, Ma, and ask a question.
I guess what I would like to ask, when we had to collaborate and revisit the pain that I caused you, what did that do to your process? Did it mature it? Did it dent it? And then my prayer was that it would help. And did you learn some things about me that it wasn't, that helped heal you instead of hurt you anymore? Because I think it's good for mothers, and unfortunately our story is too common.
Yeah,
Yes, ma'am.
And she always said, you have a book, if you don't write it, tell the story, I will. I did for like 10 years.
To answer, that was a very good series of questions, because I'm often asked about that collaboration process. So just so people know that I talked to my mother extensively, a series of conversations that took place and helped me get not just details and facts right, but also mood and tone. And I think for me, even though, as you know, I mean, I had forgiven you long ago. I had forgiven you long ago, and had already, in my mind, extended you a lot of grace. But there were stories that you told me I had no idea, like did not know at all. And hearing those stories and hearing what you went through, it allowed me to extend you even that much more grace and to see you, I think, more fully and wholly. Because I think and this is just the selfishness of a child, is that you see your parents in very narrow ways because you can't help it. Because I've only known you as mom, and that's it. And your life has been centered on me, not the other way around. So that's kind of the imbalance of the dynamic of mothers and daughters, or mothers and their children, period. So this process, I think the healing part for me was being able to see every dimension of you. And that I appreciated, because I was like, I think I only saw this dimension for this long, but now I see this one, this one, this one, and this one. And so through that, I think I was able to, you know, it grew. I mean, I already respected you, but that respect, the love, all, the grace, the tenderness, all of that really ballooned for me writing this book. So I hope that answers your question.
Well, Jemele's gonna make sure she signs each one of your books, takes a picture with each one of you.
See, why you promising stuff? I unfortunately, see, before you get ahead of yourself, I cannot take a picture with everybody, only because it does slow down the book signing process. So I want to make sure, because we only got an hour to sign all these books, so I want to make sure that I sign everybody's book.
So that's the hot seat?
That is the hot seat, yes.
Okay, so you gotta get busy.
I do. I just want to say real quick, before we wrap this up, Jalen, I want to thank you so much for doing this. And not just, for one, I mean, there's never been a time where I have called on Jalen and he not answered and not responded and not said yes. He's easy yes. And the other thing too is that I hope everybody in this room, I'm sure a lot of people in the city do, have a deep appreciation for what you have done for this city. Through the Jalen Rose Leadership Academy, you are literally changing the lives of young people in this city. We grew up in this environment. We know that there are low expectations for the children in this city, and you're helping them see things in themselves that they did not see. So I just want to thank you as a Detroiter for doing that. And also thank you for not bringing up what happened with our football teams a couple weeks. Really appreciate that. A couple weeks ago.
No doubt.
Really appreciate that.
No doubt. My pleasure. You guys have a blessed evening. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.
All right. Can we give another round of applause, please?